We lured you here today with the promise of unveiling a breakthrough digital device, and that product is called Ipod. Boom. That's Ipod. I happen to have one right here in my pocket, in fact. There it is, right there. I like working with people that make products that will get used or experienced by a lot of people, where you have a chance to in a very small way, influence how things go, influence the way people look at a product or maybe even the world in a small way. I'm very lucky I get to do that at Apple.
iTunes for Windows is probably the best Windows app ever written.
You know, I still believe that the computer business is in its infancy, that there's a tremendous amount of innovation that's going to be coming out. I'm optimistic as to the future of the computer business.
So we're very, very excited about the new Ipod Touch.
Now, why music? Well, we love music, and it's always good to do something you love.
I'll be honest, when I woke up this morning, I wasn't expecting to spend my entire day working on a video about the discontinuation of the iPod, but here we are. The iPod completely revolutionized not only the music industry along with iTunes, but the world and society at large, leading to the eventual iPhone and iPad as mobile technology would completely overtake daily life. The importance of iPod cannot be understated, and to see it be discontinued now is sombering, a reminder of how far we've come, and more importantly, where our current era of technology spawned from in the first place. iPhone rightfully gets the credit for the age of smartphones, but without iPod, there's a very, very high possibility the current tech landscape would look completely different, and odds are not for the better. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech. In case you don't know me, as of May 10th, 2022, the iPod is dead. Apple discontinued their final iPod they were selling, the Ipod Touch. There was no fanfare, it was just a press release, and that's about it. They've said the spirit of the iPod lives on. Apple has officially brought the end to the iPod line over 20 years after it originally was started. And we all knew this was coming at some point, but it's still one of those things you just don't really expect to actually happen. The iPod's been around for so long. Mind you, the iPod is still being sold right now and will continue to be sold while supplies last. They're just not making them anymore. So if you want an iPod, now's the time to buy one. I don't know why you would want to buy one. There's a reason they're discontinuing them, but if you do, now's the time. Back in October, I did a 2-hour video, documentary style video on the iPod. We looked at every single iPod ever made, and at the end of the video, when it came to kind of the future of iPod, I basically said, we don't know, but I did guess that it was going the way of the dodo, given that after the Apple event that fall, Apple hid the Ipod Touch on their website. They removed it from the top bar navigation, used to be under the music tab, and now the only way to find it is by looking at the footer of the website, and it's right there in very small text. So this was a clear sign Apple was either going to completely discontinue the iPod, which they've done, or upgrade it, which I figured it would be the former, and unfortunately it was. The most recent iPod, and the final one Apple will ever sell, was of course the 2019 Ipod Touch 7th generation, a device that, frankly, I didn't expect to last this long, but had no doubt been making Apple some decent money given how long they kept it around. At $200, it served as a cheap and easy way to buy into the iOS ecosystem, and the Ipod Touch could still serve well as a device for someone younger or anyone who didn't need an actual phone, whether to run iOS apps or games or even listen to music. But the Ipod Touch has lacked an identity for a very, very long time, as essentially it's been an iPhone without a SIM tray, a slightly underpowered iPhone with a tiny battery and mediocre camera, but more or less an iPhone all the same. It really was that cheap price point that likely appealed to those still buying it more than anything else. And considering how old the build and hardware was, no doubt Apple didn't really need to sell too many of them to make a hefty profit. And no, really, that hardware is old. You've got the A10 chipset, which was the processor introduced with the iPhone 7. That's almost 6 years ago, back in 2016. It is capable of running iOS 15 with little to no issue, and I'm sure the same will go for iOS 16, but it's still an old chipset. And it was already almost 3 years old when the Ipod Touch 7 launched in the first place. The rest of the iPod, including the camera, battery life, and design, remained completely untouched from the previous generation, being the 6th generation, released in 2015, 4 years prior. And that iPod, all it really brought was a better chipset and camera over the 5th generation iPod Ipod Touch, which came out in 2012, meaning that what we've had in 2022 is more or less the same as what we had almost a full 10 years ago. Same design, same build, same battery life. The Ipod Touch might barely be an iPod nowadays, but there's a reason it was the last one standing. The truth is, the tech world has passed the dedicated music player by, and our smartphones and smartwatches, in combination with the plethora of convenient streaming services at our disposal, have made the iPod, as it once was, utterly obsolete. In 2017, Apple quietly did away with their Ipod Nano and Ipod Shuffle, the final standalone music players they would ever sell. The same Nano that came out in 2012, and the same Shuffle that came out in 2010, albeit they both had minor color revisions. And these, while standalone music players, weren't even the iconic iPod one thinks of when it comes to the old lineup. The Ipod Classic was discontinued 8 years ago now, back in 2014, much to the chagrin of music enthusiasts who will still swear by the quality and utility of those old hard drive equipped iPods. The Ipod Classic, known as the 7th generation, came out in 2008, and then it did have a minor revision the next year in 2009, which was just a storage upgrade, but if we count that, it went from 2009 to 2014 with no changes. This makes it, as far as I can tell, the iPod that went longest untouched in Apple's lineup. And if we open things up to include iPods that had color revisions, the Ipod Shuffle 4th generation had the longest life of any iPod with an insane 7 years, 2010 to 2017, just with the color changes in 2012 and then again in 2015. Yeah, it's kind of weird this is the iPod that technically existed the longest, but it makes sense. It was already so darn small. The only thing you could really do is remove the buttons, and I mean, why would anyone ever want that or do that? Also, Apple actually did do that with the Ipod Shuffle 3rd generation, but we won't talk about that one. It's the Ipod Classic that is still regarded highly among the small but extremely dedicated iPod community. Even if Apple considers the iPod dead, that doesn't mean it is dead. And I would argue that the iPod is being kept alive by the community that still uses iPod, enjoys iPod, works on iPods. This is a custom iPod made by Elite Obsolete Electronics. I've worked with him in the past. If you watch my iPod documentary, he was the one who basically sent me like every iPod that I showed off. He's got an awesome store, and he's helping keep iPod alive. I definitely recommend checking it out if you have any interest in iPods. These classic ones are awesome, and to put faster storage in them and bigger batteries, it breathes new life into them completely. So EOE.works is his store if you want to go check it out. He's well known in the community. He's the man to go to if you want an old iPod for sure. The Ipod Classic was loved for its high storage capacities and easy modability with the physical hard drives, but there's also another popular and often forgotten iPod that's sold on EOE.works, the Ipod Mini, an iPod that got only 2 generations, one of the shortest lived devices in recent Apple history. It initially came out in 2004 and brought a smaller but still physical hard drive, giving a huge number of songs in that more compact form factor. It also had a bunch of colors for the first time in the iPod line. The iPod Mini came just before the popularization and affordability of flash storage, which would end up being the much better way to go, with the iPod Nano line hitting in 2005, and of course being the cause for the iPod Mini to peter out so quickly. Flash storage was just more practical. It was lighter, smaller, required no moving parts, and was significantly faster. It was definitely the future when it came to any portable device. I absolutely love the iPod Mini. I find it fascinating, and I really need to do a dedicated video on it. It's so darn cool, and it's one of the more obscure Apple devices to come out in the past 20 years. It only existing for so little time also goes to show just how fast technology was moving in the early days of iPod, and of course still is. But almost every single year there was like major iPod upgrades. It's actually insane how quickly they were pumping them out. Speaking of quick, let's talk briefly about the shortest lived individual iPod, the iPod with color display. The iPod 4th generation came out in 2004 July, and then later that year in October the iPod Photo came out, which was the 4th generation but with a color screen. iPod Photo because it could display photos now. But then for whatever reason, the next year, June 2005, Apple released the iPod with color display, which functionally was still a 4th generation iPod. It was the same as the Photo. The difference is the software was revised, and for whatever reason, even though it's functionally the same, the iPod Color uses a different logic board and LCD, so you can't use an iPod Photo display on an iPod Color and vice versa. Because of course. But yeah, the iPod Color was discontinued October 12, 2005, meaning it was around for only 106 days. At this point, the iPod 5 came out. It was by and far the shortest lived iPod of all time. I don't know why Apple decided to make it different from the Photo in the first place, but they did, so it's definitely one of the most obscure iPods ever made. Also, talking about the iPod Nano a little bit more, it's crazy just how much variation there was in the line over the years. The first iPod Nano looked like this and came out September 2005. It basically looked like a smaller 5th generation iPod. But then the next year, in 2006, September, the second generation iPod Nano completely changed up the look. Same general shape, but it was fully aluminum and had colors now. And in fact, this was the first iPod to have aluminum again since the Ipod Mini had been discontinued when the Ipod Nano came out. So this is a pretty good design. I mean, it looks like a small iPod, it makes sense, but in 2007, Apple changed up the look completely again, going to the third gen iPod Nano, aka the Fat iPod Nano, and it's pretty clear why. Now this one brought video, so they wanted a bigger display, that's clear, but even so, it just looks so different. And then the fourth generation iPod Nano came out in 2008, and guess what? Complete redesign yet again. This time, it went back to kind of that second gen look, but with a bigger display and a whole bunch of different colors. But let's not stop there. In 2009, another generation came out looking similar, but with a taller display. The camera, weirdly enough, in fact, the iPod Nano actually had a camera before the Ipod Touch ever did. And then in 2010, it flipped on its head yet again with the iPod Nano 6th generation, which was this one. You might remember this one is the one that kind of looks like the Apple Watch. I did a video years back on the 2010 Apple Watch, and yeah, people use this as a watch. I myself did back in the day, and it was awesome. It was touchscreen, it was small, it made a lot of sense. But of course, it wouldn't stick around for too long because in 2012, in came the iPod Nano 7th generation, which yet again went for that taller look, but this time it was touchscreen with a home button, and basically looked like a mini iPod Touch if anything else, except, you know, all it really did was play music. The iPod Shuffle had a lot of different looks to it, but the iPod Nano is in like a different league. They just shifted the design so much over the years, it was insane. And you have something like the Ipod Touch, which practically looked the same up until the 5th generation. The first one, the second one, the third one, they all had the stainless steel backing. The 4th gen also was similar, but it had a camera, so it's a little easier to tell which is which. And then, of course, the 5th generation came out with all the colors and the aluminum yet again. It's kind of funny that the Ipod Touch followed the same path as the iPod Nano, going from stainless steel to eventually aluminum and all those colors. I never really thought about it before, but yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. And if you want another obscure iPod, there was also the 2013 Ipod Touch 5th gen with no Eyesight camera. Yeah, there was no camera on the back. Why? Well, it was a budget version, it had 16 gigabytes, and while it was only around for just over a year, that was still over triple the amount of time that the iPod Color existed. The iPod has seen so many different variations in the past 20 years, so many facelifts, so many different innovations brought to the table, changes. It is so cool to see the progress that happened and the progress that continues to happen today with iPhone and beyond. It is insane how much the iPod innovated over the years before iPhone even came out, and of course once iPhone did, it basically took what iPod had established and built on it, making the first actually good smartphone, and from there the rest is, as they say, history. It's no coincidence that Steve Jobs described the iPhone having three aspects. It was an internet communicator, a mobile phone, and of course, an iPod. iPod might be dead in name, but Apple's right, the spirit does live on, and it lives on in iPhone and the rest of their products they have today. Nothing would be the same if iPod had not existed and Steve Jobs hadn't come back to Apple, as he and his team brought innovation after innovation, and somehow not only revolutionized the computer industry, and then the music industry, and then the smartphone industry, but the world as a whole. The impact iPod has had over the years cannot be understated. And I've done a 2-hour video on iPod. If you've seen it, you know all this already, and I don't blame you if you haven't, it's 2 hours long. But even so, I wanted to take some time and just talk about it today, as it's one of the most important tech devices we'll ever see in our lifetime, and it's done. It's over. We all knew it was coming, but at the same time, I don't know, just didn't think it would actually come. But here we are, and so yeah, I guess I'm right about done here. Maybe hit that like button if you've ever used an iPod in your lifetime. That should apply to most of you, so there better be a lot of likes. No, I'm kidding around, of course, but yeah, like, subscribe if you want to do that. That would be awesome. Also, socials. I've got Instagram, Twitter, and I also have TikTok. I also have a Discord if you want to come by, say hi. So enough stalling, I suppose. We should probably wrap this up. My poor dog has been waiting patiently at my feet. She doesn't like that I've been on the computer all day. You gonna miss the iPod, Cola? What do you think? Thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.